a Wednesday Wheelhouse. You're listening to ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. It is Wednesday, January 11th, 2023, as we get things rolling here at the start of a brand new Wheelhouse radio program. Jake Asman, Cody Stoots, BK Brad Kellner, producer Andrew Carlson with you until 7 o'clock. A lot to talk about today, a lot happening involving the Houston Texans coaching search. And that's where we start, gentlemen. The Houston Texans have requested permission to speak with former Saints head coach Sean Payton. Sean Payton cannot interview with any team until January 17th, but add the Texans to the list of teams that have requested for Sean Payton. The Broncos, the Cardinals, and now the Texans all have permission, according to Ian Rappaport, to speak with the Super Bowl winning former Saints head coach.
The Houston Texans are making up for two very crappy coaching searches in short order. Now, ultimately, they got to hire one of these guys. He's got to be really good. But as far as the process, which we were highly critical of last year, which was one of the most bungling, idiotic processes in hiring a head coach we'd seen in a long time in the NFL, everybody who's everybody, the Texans want to talk to him. Now, are they going to get to talk to, at this point, all seven guys? I don't know. But they're certainly going to take their swing, and they're certainly going to try to talk to all these guys. And if they do, and if they interview all seven of these guys and get good vibes from some of them, from this list, from this group of people that they requested to talk to, you can find a good head coach.
Absolutely.
I'm thumbs up on the potential outcome. Look, obviously varying levels of whatever it is. I'm thumbs up on basically any of these guys ending up as the Texans head coach. I'll feel better about some. I'll feel worse about some. But you can't say that about the past couple of coach searches that this team has had. And you can't say that about really any coach search. Like, how many times as an organization interviewed a group of candidates where you might be fine with any of those candidates? Like, that's very rare. At this point, I'm fine with any of the candidates, especially, I mean, hell, Sean Payton is up here? Come on. That's fun.
Well, wait a second, though. You were very anti-Sean Payton when I brought this up months ago, that they should talk to him and figure it out.
I don't know what the exact cost is. And if it costs a first-round pick, then I'm out on that. But if it costs a second that could turn into something, if it costs multiple mid-round picks, I'm happy to have that conversation. I don't want Sean Payton if it costs a first-round pick.
I would take Sean Payton and trade the Browns pick in a second, if that's what it is. I'm not giving up the second pick in the draft because I need Sean Payton to coach the quarterback that's going to be selected with that number 2 overall pick. But if I could trade the 12th pick in the draft, which is the Cleveland Browns pick that you acquired in the Watson deal, and turn that into a future Hall of Fame head coach who is of the offensive mind that could help Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud or whoever Sean Payton deems as the guy he wants to coach, Cody, I'm doing that in a second. I love the fact they put the request in. I think it shows they're serious. And perhaps this adds some context to what Nick Caserio was talking about at his press conference about maybe stepping down or not being as controlling as he implied. Sean Payton comes in, and he thinks he could work with Nick Caserio. Sean Payton's going to get final say on a lot of personnel decisions, as he should, and Nick should defer to him if he wants to ultimately save his job, because this is the last coach Caserio gets to hire. And on his resume right now is David Culley and Lovie Smith. So if he goes from those two guys who didn't belong in the NFL as head coaches to Sean Payton, that will be the ultimate move to excite this fan base and I think earn back a tremendous amount of trust that Texans fans will then have in Nick Caserio.
I'm pleasantly surprised by this news, based on the fact that it took a couple of days for Sean Payton to get requested. Like, I thought the Texans weren't going to talk to him, regardless of the reason. I figured Sean Payton was not a serious, legitimate candidate for the Houston Texans, but I like it. Look, I want the Texans to talk to as many people as possible, right? We talked about this earlier this week. You can learn a lot about your franchise just by interviewing a bunch of head coaching candidates across the league, because those guys, well, they're trying to get the job. So they're going to do their research. They're going to study your team, and they're going to be able to tell you what you're doing right, but also things that you need to improve on and to learn from a Super Bowl winning head coach who could potentially give you some tips and strategies on how to turn your franchise around, regardless of if you ultimately end up making him your head coach. That's a good thing. That's something the Texans should do. They should talk to as many people as possible before making their ultimate decision. So I like that they're doing that. And it does show that Nick Caserio and the McNair family is more serious about getting this thing right. I mean, last year we've talked about it a lot. The Texans interviewed a number of candidates that no other team would have interviewed. And ultimately, their last two head coaches have been two candidates that nobody else would have made their head coach. Hell, nobody else would have interviewed David Culley 2 years ago. Nobody else did interview David Culley 2 years ago. Nobody else did interview Lovie Smith last year. But the situation is different. This is a more attractive job right now. You've got draft capital. You've got money. You've got Deshaun Watson out of here. You should be, Cody, to use your verbiage, shopping at the top. You should be going after guys like Sean Payton and DeMeco Ryans and Jim Harbaugh and some of the other candidates that the Texans have already requested to interview. That's what they should be doing, and it's nice to see them actually act like a good football team, like a smart football team, which is not what they've been over the past couple of years.
Your point about potentially learning something from Sean Payton if you talk to him and he decides that he ultimately doesn't want to be the head coach of the Houston Texans is such a good one, BK, because Sean Payton can come in here, and in the course of that interview, Cal McNair and Nick Caserio and whoever else is important and in the interview room talking to Sean Payton may learn either by Payton out and out saying it or just the way Sean Payton talks about the organization, talks about the franchise, what's not good enough for Sean Payton, okay? Because if it's not good enough for Sean Payton, it's perhaps something you need to address as an organization. If Sean Payton comes in here and says, yeah, you know what, the type of draft picks that you guys have made over the past couple of years, I don't know if that's really something I want to end up coaching. Okay, well, then Nick Caserio goes back to the drawing board. All right, what type of draft picks did we make? How did we lead to that process? You may just learn things about your organization because, yes, self-assessment is important. You hear coaches talk about it all the time. Your general managers talk about it all the time. You have to assess your own work over the course of a season and seasons in the NFL. But having a high-functioning, big-time football mind walk into your building and say, this isn't right, that's not right, this incorrect, that's not correct, that's a big bonus, even if Payton doesn't end up saying he wants this job. Because if Sean Payton wants somebody to just hand the organization to him and have a quarterback already in place and hit the ground running, there's a couple of different spots that have that. The Texans don't have that. But it's worth, for Sean Payton's situation, to listen and at least see what the Texans want to say.
This is a great job for someone like Sean Payton. The division is not very good, and you could pick your quarterback and build with that guy. If he wants to coach for, another, let's say, 8 to 10 years, he's still young enough to do that, and he would find his quarterback. So I think it's an attractive job for him. He was on Fox on Sunday. He's been with Fox all season since he's not coaching in the NFL this year. And then on the Fox set, they asked him what is important and what he's looking for in his next job.
I think that it's really about the triangular relationship, ownership, front office, head coach. When we went to New Orleans, and I say we because there were a lot of people involved, the quarterback was unsettled at that time. So I think ownership and the functionality of the front office is most important.
Well, what are two things the Texans don't have? Good ownership and functionality in the front office.
Well, all you could hope, though, is that Caserio could sell Sean Payton on this job.
Sure.
That's all you could hope for, because obviously Cal's not going to sit there and be very impressive in this interview process. But if Cal's basically like, Sean, you get to run the team the way you want, and you get to work in concert with Nick, but Nick's going to defer to you, this could be an attractive job for you. Because if you just look at the draft capital, the salary cap space, the division, it is an attractive job.
Yeah.
But if it's truly about ownership, then BK, you're 100% right. That's going to scare Sean Payton away.
Yeah, I mean, those are the two things he talked about right there. This is an attractive job for a number of different reasons, but the least attractive part of this job is ownership and front office instability, because look what's happened with the last two coaches. They only made it 1 year, and this thing has been a disaster from the top down. So if Sean Payton's serious about this, look, there's no obvious home run job for Sean Payton, right? Like, of the 5 vacancies, every single one of them has their issues. They've got concerns. They've got question marks. There's no obvious perfect fit for him. Honestly, he might sit this year out and wait for something else. Like, it could be something like that. But, Cody, if Sean's true to his word and ownership and front office stability and just having a good relationship with those guys is at the top of his list of priorities, then the Texans have no chance, regardless of them putting in a request to interview.
I mean, the situation that Sean Payton would be walking into is not super different from the one that he walked into in New Orleans. The Saints were an absolute joke before Sean Payton. Their fans, on a regular basis, showed up to seasons worth of games wearing paper bags on their head.
They were the Aints.
They had one playoff victory in the history of the franchise that had started in 1967 before Sean Payton walked in there. And, oh, by the way, the general manager and the guy that was in charge had already been working there for a couple of years when Sean Payton took that job in New Orleans. Now, maybe Sean Payton has learned some things in time since he got into the NFL, since he had success with Saints, and he learns, okay, I need a little bit more out of this, I need a little bit more out of that from the GM, from the ownership standpoint. But to me, wanting to talk to Sean Payton at least shows a willingness to bend knee to Sean Payton in some areas of the organization because he's going to have a heavy input in the messaging, the direction of the franchise, how it's presented, how you want people in the organization to talk about the franchise. Like, Payton's going to set the tone for all of that. And for the past 2 years, it's been Caserio. Yeah. And again, my thought is Caserio doesn't want to do that anymore. Caserio wants to sit back and help pick the players and scout the guys and throw quarterback passes and drills. Like, I don't think he wants to set the tone of the organization anymore. I think they want someone to come in there as the head coach and say, this is how we talk about the Houston Texans when we talk about them in public. This is our messaging to the fans. This is who we're drafting. We're going to get on the road back to relevancy, and this is a division we can do it. I think they want that, and Sean Payton is a guy that feels like he can. He did it to a downtrodden joke of an organization before. He feels like a guy that can deliver that.
So if the Saints want the Browns' first pick this year, you're still not doing it? You just sold why you do it for Sean Payton. Cody, this franchise has been a joke. A joke. You bring in Sean Payton, you're automatically respected. We're talking about all these coordinators like we have any idea they're going to be any good. We know what Sean Payton is. Guy's won a Super Bowl. He's an offensive-minded guy. If it takes the Browns pick to get him, you do it. You still have an extra first-round pick from Cleveland next year as well. So you're still loaded with draft capital, and if it's about setting up Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud for success, you're not going to find a better candidate that's going to put you in the best spot to do that.
Yeah, but I don't know that Sean Payton wants the young guy. Remember, he got to New Orleans and they took a veteran. They got Drew Brees in there.
Then you know what? I'll let him execute his plan, but at least you feel comfortable with the guy executing the plan. If DeMeco Ryans comes in and is like, I don't really want a quarterback, I'm going to wait. Are you still going to love that idea?
Well, DeMeco's not the head coach.
Well, that's part of the problem here, right? Like you have someone who's won a Super Bowl that is interested enough to at least consider the Texans. And out of the coaching jobs that he's spoken to so far or has been requested for, Broncos, Cardinals, and Texans, if I'm him, I think the Texans is the best job out of those teams. The Broncos, you got to deal with what the heck Russell Wilson is. You also got to deal with that division having Mahomes and Herbert in it. If I go to the Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray, what is he? He's not going to play most of next year. I come to the Texans right away. The expectations are for me to develop a stud quarterback and eventually win with the guy. And this fan base will love him the second he walks through the door.
I have one reservation about using that pick to go get Sean Payton, and I'll tell you about it next.
Let's get into it. 713-780-ESPN. If you're just tuning in, the Texans have become the third NFL team to put in a request to speak with former Saints head coach Sean Payton. More coming up. It's the Wheelhouse here on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. Cody, continue your main point on the Texans requesting an interview with Sean Payton.
Look, there's obviously a ton to like about Sean Payton, and you've talked about how if it's the 12th pick in the draft and that's all it takes to get Sean Payton, and then you write him the big check, if you remember – or you believe the rumors, Payton was the second highest paid coach in all of football when he left the Saints, behind only Bill Belichick. From that, I don't care about that. Cal McNair's got money. The Texans have money. They can write those big checks. That's not a conversation piece. The 12th overall pick, I'm not there yet, and here's why I'm not there yet. The 12th overall pick, I don't know if the Texans are going to need that to get the quarterback that they want. And so it would be a lot easier for me to jettison that 12th overall pick to New Orleans for Sean Payton if I knew the Texans had 1-1 and they could pick whoever the hell they wanted. Or Sean Payton could pick whoever the hell he wanted. But without that, I don't know if they need either that extra Browns pick next year or their pick next year or the Browns pick this year. I don't know if they need some of those selections to ultimately end up getting the exact player that they want in the draft. By virtue of Lovie Smith and his players winning that meaningless game at the end of the year, they're picking 2 instead of 1. So until I have a little bit better understanding of that process and maybe where Payton wants to go, because if he doesn't want one of the rookie quarterbacks, then maybe it doesn't matter as much what you're doing at number 2 when it involves the quarterbacks. Or you could recoup picks by moving down because Payton wants one of the veterans and you're moving down from 2 because somebody else wants to come up and get another quarterback or the other quarterback. But like, I gotta have a bit more understanding as an organization about what Payton wants to try to execute. Because if he walks in and says, "Yeah, I'm coaching this team, but we got to get Bryce Young," you may need the 12th overall pick to go get Bryce Young. And so until I know exactly Payton's plan, and if he's on board with the young guy, and he says, "I can coach either of them up," okay, well then maybe the 12th pick's not as valuable. But if you need that 12th pick to go get the guy you want or the guy Sean Payton wants, it becomes more difficult to pay that price.
Hold on now. Are we cool with Sean Payton if he plans on bringing in Derek Carr or Jimmy Garoppolo this offseason?
I am not. I prefer a coach that is going to bring in one of the two rookie quarterbacks that I am okay with, which is Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, and which are widely thought to be the top two quarterbacks in this class. That is my preference from the head coach, is that they want one of the top two rookie quarterbacks to be the quarterback for the Texans in 2023.
I'm cool with it. If he doesn't think those guys are worth it, then at least I feel comfortable knowing that he has a track record to fall back on. If he doesn't think, let's say Bryce Young's there at 2 and he chooses not to take him, and this is the guy that coached Drew Brees for 15 years, that would speak volumes about Sean Payton really not thinking Bryce Young's going to be any good, considering he won a Super Bowl with an undersized quarterback. So I'm cool with it, but I don't think he takes this job to bring in Jimmy G or Derek Carr. I think he's only coming here if he believes in one of these guys and he knows he can get them, and he can go out there and kind of build something brand new with the Texans. So that concern, I don't think will ever really come up, because I don't think he's taking this job in the first place, BK, unless he knows I'm getting one of these guys I could build with.
I'd like to think so, too, because that's one of the most attractive parts of this job, is the fact that you might be able to draft the top quarterback in this year's draft. Going out and getting Jimmy G or Derek Carr, well, there are a lot of teams out there who could go out and get Jimmy G or Derek Carr, but there aren't a lot of teams out there who have the resources to draft a Bryce Young or a C.J. Stroud. So, I'm with you on that. I mean, all of us were in agreement, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Like, we want the Texans to take a quarterback with their top pick in this draft. There's not a coach out there who I'd be okay with just changing the entire plan. Like, if Sean Payton is like, we're tanking for Caleb Williams next year, I'm out. Sorry. If Jim Harbaugh's like, we're tanking for Drake May next year, I'm out. Sorry. This team needs a young franchise quarterback. So that can't be the plan, whether it's one of these coordinators or even if it's Sean Payton or Jim Harbaugh, one of the top guys on most teams' list. It cannot be a total reworking of your franchise plan where you try to suck at football for another season. That just can't happen.
Do you have any sort of true guess on what the compensation is ultimately going to end up being for Sean Payton? Because if it is simply one first-round draft pick, it becomes a very difficult thing for Denver to bring that. Like, Denver doesn't have those.
Unless they talk about trading a future first-round pick.
Sure. And at that point, the value of a first-round pick 3 years in the future is so low. It drops almost a round per year when you go in the future and you talk to some of these draft evaluators, especially after you know a portion of the draft order, the value drops in the future. Okay, then you bring up Arizona. Arizona doesn't even have a general manager. Now, that probably works in their favor, because then Sean Payton gets there, he gets to sort of hire the general manager, but they have the number 3 overall pick in the draft. Like, they're going to trade the number 3 overall pick, a player that could very much help Kyler Murray very much help Kyler Murray in the coming years to get Sean Payton.
It's why I think the compensation is going to vary team to team. You know, for the Texans, they're dealing from a position of strength. They could offer the 12th overall pick in the draft and still have the number 2 overall pick, and you could turn Deshaun Watson into Sean Payton. If you're the Broncos, you might have to trade one of your key players just to get a first-round pick to then go out there and bring in Sean Payton. Or you might have to trade future picks you don't want to trade, or maybe you have to trade your second and third-round picks in the package to get Sean Payton. For the Texans, to me, it makes the most sense. It's one first-round pick when you have 2. And you turn Deshaun Watson into a Hall of Fame coach who's only had 4 losing seasons in 15 years, who always has his teams in the playoffs, who's an offensive-minded guy. I really don't see the downside here. Like, you're going to go from Bill O'Brien to then David Culley and Lovie Smith, and now after all this, the mess that this fan base has unfortunately had to deal with, at least you come out on the other end with a Super Bowl winning head coach who could help develop your stud quarterback at the top of the draft.
I do want to correct thing. I misspoke. Denver has San Francisco's pick this year, so Denver does have a first-round pick. It's currently...
I might be pick 31.
It could be 31. It could be 32. It could be 29.
Well, 32 doesn't exist, as we know.
Yeah, exactly.
I know what your point is.
Yes. It could be the last pick in the first round.
The Texans should have pick 32 for the first time in franchise history, but they screwed it up. I'm beating the Colts.
713-780-ESPN. We got Mike Florio with us today at 5:30, so we will pick his brain on the compensation for Sean Payton then. But right now, let's go to the phones. Charles, start us off today, Charles. You're on the Wheelhouse.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Always a pleasure to listen to you guys' show. I got about a minute I want to unpack, and I really believe when I unpack, I'm going to take all 3 of you guys to answer this. First and foremost, let's talk about the elephant in the room. No one's talking about why Nick Caserio should be fired. Now, we all know his decision-making is in front of us all as a big display. He's made a ton of bad decisions. At the end of the day, David Culley, Lovie Smith, even not taking his dragon, taking time to fire Jack Easterby. We're talking about at the end of the day, his picks should have, at the end of the day, took Sauce Gardner. He took Derek Stingley. We're talking about, again, not controlling the last game that cost us the first pick. I mean, I'm just going to put it out there, guys. If he was a brother, he'd have been fired. But at the end of the day, we can understand why he's not fired. I think it's a perfect job for Sean Payton because we shouldn't even have a general manager either. If he came in 3 years ago and said, trust the process, like Philadelphia 76ers, I'd have been fine with that. But no, we didn't do what he wants to do. And now yesterday at his press conference, he wants to sound like, oh, well, I'll help the coach find out what players he wants. He did that at first. No one's impressed with Patriots. No one's impressed with Bill Belichick. None of his little minions have turned out to be anything. So I'm not impressed with Caserio at all. But yet everybody's not saying anything except for, why is this guy still the GM when everybody else got fired? He should be fired. He's made Houston a joke. So fire him. But I'm not having one sportcaster, one guy with his own podcast saying that guy should not be the GM of Houston.
Charles, thank you for the call. This is the wrong show. I've been talking about this for months, about Nick Caserio not getting the right to hire a third coach in 3 years.
Yeah,
so maybe other shows have ignored it, but I've been very critical of the Texans general manager.
Charles, we love you. We appreciate when you do listen. We'd like for you to listen more because, Jake's talked about it a lot. And look, you're very much entitled to that opinion. I mean, the majority of Nick Caserio's decisions since he took over as this team's GM have been bad. There have been some good ones that you could point to, but the majority of the decisions that he's made have been bad. And most GMs don't get the opportunity to hire 3 head coaches during their tenure, let alone in 3 years. Now, Cody, you and I think, agree the circumstances around here are much different. Like, this thing was an S show before Nick Caserio got here. Okay, if you want like one person to point fingers to, it should be the owner of the team.
And unfortunately, you can't fire the owner.
Yeah, he's been the guy who's been here throughout the entire thing. Well, you can't fire him. Caserio is not absolved of any or all blame. He shouldn't be. But I think some of the circumstances that have been around here over the last couple of years that have been out of his control, I think have warranted him one more year. Now, if things don't turn around, I'm not saying like by the end of his first contract, which is 4 years down the road, if things don't change next season based on this hire that he makes at head coach, based on this draft that he has, based on the offseason that he has bringing in free agents, then you've got to make the move, and he should absolutely be gone.
Which is why maybe he realizes, holy crap, I'm lucky to still have a job. I might as well hire Sean Payton and get out of the way. Like, I tried it my way. It hasn't worked. I could bring in Sean Payton. I'll work with him, and we could solve our coaching problem once and for all, and I could go back to taking a backseat kind of behind the scenes. 713-780-ESPN is the number. If you're just tuning in, the Texans have been granted permission to speak with Sean Payton about their head coaching opening. Would Sean Payton answer a big-time question that Nick Caserio was alluding to the other day? We'll get into it next right here on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5.
I'm not there yet. Now, the organization is going to have a better understanding of Sean Payton's plan, which I will now refer to going forward as the Payton plan because I'm a big fan of alliteration. The Payton plan, if it includes, I got to have Bryce Young, you may need the 12th overall pick. It may not cost the 12th overall pick. Arizona's got the 3rd pick. I have a high suspicion they're not trading the 3rd pick for Sean Payton.
Would you trade a 2nd and a 3rd round pick for Sean Payton instead of the 12th pick? You do that instead?
Yeah. I'd trade 2 seconds and 2 thirds for him. That 1st round picks, man, you could do a lot with that 12th overall pick. And remember,
you also could draft a bust. They took Kenyon Green with that pick last year. It's not working out so far.
And remember, Caserio mentioned this on Monday, and he said, look, ultimately it's a players' league. You got to get good players. 12th overall pick would be a pretty damn good player.
For sure, but Brian Daboll took the same roster that had 3 wins a year ago with the Giants and got them to the playoffs. So, like, coaching still ultimately matters more than maybe in any other sport.
Yeah, they also added 2 top 10 picks.
Same quarterback that everyone thought was a bust. Now you're going to bring in Sean Payton, and he's going to be able to coach up Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys this?
Yeah.
If we're staying on this topic?
Sure, go for it.
Would you trade the number 12 overall pick for Mike McCarthy?
No.
Would you trade a 2nd and a 3rd for Mike McCarthy?
No.
Sean Payton is skinny Mike McCarthy.
Ooh.
Guys. Okay? Sean Payton's career winning percentage, 62%. Mike McCarthy's career winning percentage, 61%. Sean Payton in the playoffs is 9-8. Mike McCarthy in the playoffs is 10-9. Both of those guys had the best quarterbacks of all time, some of the best quarterbacks of all time, and they could only win 1 Super Bowl with them early in their career. Both of those guys are known for flaming out too early in the playoffs, despite having incredibly talented rosters that should have done better in the postseason than they actually did. So my question to y'all is, what's the difference between these two?
I think Peyton's better. I think he's more of a true offensive-minded guy. And I think some of those Packers teams, like, I know Drew Brees was great, but we're talking about like Aaron Rodgers. We're talking about Aaron Rodgers.
I mean, they're two of the best quarterbacks of all time. They're two first-ballot Hall of Famers. And the
Who's
entire
better, though, Brees or Rodgers?
Well, the entire conversation for both of their careers was their coach didn't do enough with them.
Mm-hmm.
They should have done more.
I'll say this about Sean Payton. He should have been to a second Super Bowl the year they got absolutely screwed in the NFC title game. Mike McCarthy only went to that one Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers.
There's no doubt. They got close. I mean, if the Packers' dimwit Bostic recovers an onside kick against the Seahawks, like, that's not Mike McCarthy's fault. Like, they should have gone to a second Super Bowl, too.
It's true.
But they ultimately did.
But who do you think's a better coach?
So, look, I think Sean Payton is a slightly better coach. But I guess what I'm getting at is there are multiple ways to skin a cat. You could still, like, if Sean Payton was the only good NFL coach in the history of the league, then I'd be willing to bend over backwards to make that dude our head coach. But there have been a million great hires in the history of this league that haven't involved trading a first-round pick to make it happen. I still think the Texans can end up with a really good coach and keep all of their draft picks to revamp this roster that really, really needs it.
I do. Here's the positive for the keep the draft pick crowd, which is where I stand right now, which it sounds like where BK is. I do really like some of these other candidates. They're not Sean Payton. They don't have the resume, but their resume to this point and some of the stuff that they have been able to perpetrate in their time prior to becoming a head coach is really good and really solid along the lines of what Sean Payton's was before he ended up as a head coach in this league. It's also a young man's game. It's also an offensive-minded game. Now, Payton's an offensive guy, certainly, but it's a young man's game. You see some of the guys that have regular and consistent success go to Super Bowls. The pushback on the worrying about the playoffs, worrying about the Super Bowls is like you kind of need a builder. And like Payton was that builder. He's one of actually I did this study a couple of years ago. Most of the time, a coach that's worth a crap goes to the playoffs and sometimes even goes to the championship game in his conference within the first 3 years as a coach. Like almost all the really good coaches, the coaches that you would get excited about, the coaches that you would trade draft picks to go get, they go to a championship game or they go to the Super Bowl very early on in their career. Payton did it in his very first year with the team amongst a very weird situation. Now, they took a kind of a step back the next 2 years, but then after that, boom, they won the Super Bowl. So
Year 4, he won the Super Bowl in New Orleans.
The builder aspect is important in this coaching conversation as well, and I feel like that Saints situation they took over, which was a 3-win football team in the middle of all the off-the-field stuff that he had to deal with too, which was the city rebuilding and Katrina and this and that, that was a big positive to Payton's resume as well. As they built it and they were successful every year for a long time, and then they had a little step back and then they got successful again. Like that's a big positive for him that some of these guys don't have. Because I bet if you go to the whiteboard, and I get concerned with guys who've been out and come back in. That was a big concern with McCarthy. You go out, come back in, he's not even running the offense in Dallas. They got a coordinator running the offense for him in Dallas. That'd be my concern with Harbaugh. Is you haven't coordinated an NFL offense in almost a decade. Yeah. Like that's my concern with Harbaugh. Like the guys that jump out, jump back in, I do get a little worried about them, but you're not hiring a scheme. You're hiring a guy to build an organization. So I think the building thing gets a positive for, hey, Payton built something in New Orleans.
This is a team that has the worst reputation, a franchise that has the worst reputation in the NFL right now. So like ignore just Sean Payton as like what the record is, like the perception of your team drastically changes by bringing in Sean Payton. You're going to be universally praised for this move, and it's going to reignite this fan base especially. And I think that has to play a part in this process as well. If you're Cal McNair being like, look, like what can I do to get this fan base excited again? It's not just having some new uniforms. If you're going to end up hiring David Culley and Lovie Smith the last couple of years, it's bringing in Sean Payton. And if it's not Sean Payton, like it's bringing in like a guy like D'Amico Ryans. But as far as like the best option available, it's Sean Payton. All these other coordinators, you're hoping they end up being really good head coaches. We can nitpick Sean Payton's resume, but we know the guy's a damn good football coach. He's had only 4 losing seasons in 15 years. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, you could kind of criticize him. Maybe he should have won more, dare I say, in New Orleans.
He should have.
But ultimately, this is a really, really good head coach that is available, that is interested in speaking with you. If it only takes the 12th overall pick to get him, and I still have the 2nd overall pick, I'm making that move in a second.
Yeah, look, don't get my words twisted. If Sean Payton didn't cost a first-round draft pick or multiple draft picks, I'd be all over. Like, he'd be my top choice. I think you could still get a really, really good head coach and keep all of your draft picks to help your roster figure it out.
It's a bigger risk going down that path, though. Like with Sean Payton, you know you're getting a good coach. With all these coordinators, you hope they're a good coach. That, to me, is worth a first-round pick when you have extra ones because you had to, unfortunately, trade away the best quarterback this franchise has ever had.
BK, do you like Harbaugh more than Sean Payton? He doesn't cost the first-round pick.
Yeah, I've been back and forth on this for the last couple of weeks. I mean, your point that you just brought up is something I've thought about a lot. Like, the fact that he's been out of the NFL for nearly a decade worries me a little bit. To be honest, like, I'm worried about giving either of those guys full personnel control, especially Harbaugh, because he's been out of the league for 10 years.
By the way, full personnel control for Sean Payton is part of the reason Sean Payton walked away. They jacked that roster up. They didn't have a quarterback option. They traded a first-round pick for a wide receiver. Like, you know.
That Super Bowl roster was built more by Mickey Loomis than by Sean Payton.
They traded not a wide receiver. They traded a first-round pick for Marcus Davenport, a defensive lineman that basically never panned out. They worked they got themselves into salary cap hell year after year after year. So look, there's some success certainly from what Sean Payton did. Sean Payton got a little crazy running things in New Orleans if he's going to take credit for having run some stuff in New Orleans. And maybe it's a positive to Sean Payton that he could say, well, look how that thing looked as soon as I walked out of the building. That was all me. Like we were almost in the playoffs a year ago, and then we were a below 500 team the moment I walked out of the building. It's like, yeah, you were also a below 500 team the moment you walked out of the building because everybody was old and overpaid.
Well, one of the things I think he does deserve credit for, Jameis Winston looked like a damn good quarterback last year before he went down when Sean Payton was calling him. So it's not like he only had quarterback success with Drew Brees. He was very innovative in how they used Taysom Hill. Like, the guy's a damn good coach. We can, like, nickel and dime his resume. We can nitpick it all we want, but he's available. He's considering you. I gotta do it if I'm Cal McNair. I don't trust Nick Caserio to hire the right coach. This is the guy that I know is a damn good coach. That, to me, is worth the 12th round pick when I already have the second overall pick anyway because of the Deshaun Watson trade.
You're entitled to that opinion. I disagree with it. I also will say we have no idea if Sean Payton is interested in the Texans. Just because the Texans requested to interview Sean Payton does not mean Payton even has to take the interview, let alone consider the job.
Well, they granted permission for him to speak. I feel like this is one of those things that Caserio was alluding to yesterday about how some of the conversations with agents and candidates perceived to not be interested in the job couldn't be farther from the truth. Maybe Nick Caserio, when he said those comments on KILT, was alluding to the fact that Sean Payton is interested in taking this job.
And if you're Sean Payton, you're already asking for a big number. Why not take every interview and just pump that number up more? Maybe Sean Payton walks back in as the highest paid NFL head coach because one of the three organizations that have requested to talk to him desperately need Sean Payton. Can you imagine Kyler Murray and Sean Payton sitting down and having a conversation?
No.
That's going to be – because you got to imagine at some point, like Denver, they have Russ. I could see where, Mr. Fake Persona Russ Wilson sits down with Sean Payton and they just have a grand old time talking football and all that kind of stuff. But at some point, Sean Payton, you would think if he gets pretty far into the process with Arizona, he's going to talk to Kyler Murray. And then you'll have a pretty good idea of exactly what he's coaching for the next 4 or 5 years. Like that's an advantage that the Texans do have in this process. The Denver Broncos are committed to Russell Wilson. The Arizona Cardinals are committed to Kyler Murray. And if Sean Payton doesn't love either of those guys and wants to take a swing at one of these rookies, the Texans can go and get one of those rookies for him. So that's one advantage the Texans have. Now they got not the best resume or not the best reputation in the world at GM and head coach. A GM and owner, but Sean Payton can call his shot on who the quarterback is, and we all know that's one of the most important things for a franchise going forward.
The Payton plan, it's underway. Can Cal McNair get Sean Payton to the Texans?
Thank you for watching a video on my YouTube channel. If you're a Houston sports fan, stop what you're doing, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you listen to me, Cody Stoots, and Brad Kellner on the Wheelhouse every weekday from 3 to 7 if you are in Houston. That's on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5 FM.